thank you for joining us on this episode of the Event Pro Show. I am your host, Seth Mackey. I'm the CEO of LEMG. We're an event production company based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. We travel all over the country, producing events for meeting planners that are producing corporate events. And so, as you know, I always try to have an expert that in some way, shape, or form touches corporate events. But today is a little special because our guest today has some really deep knowledge in a subject that keeps coming up. I'm excited to get to, but Michael, let me just read your bio really quick, and then we'll get at it. Today's guest is Michael Farrell, Director of Development at Van Wagner, a company that works at the intersection of sports, media, and live events, and helps bring some of the biggest moments in sports and entertainment to life. Michael works with brands, venues, and rights holders to create partnerships and experiences that connect fans with events that they love. Michael Farrell, welcome to the show.
Hey, Seth. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. We met just a while ago, but kind of hit it off, and I learned that you have a special skill that I will be asking you about in a little bit. But can you give us a little info on maybe your career arc? Like, where did you start? How did you get to where you are today? Can you give us a little
Sure. Yeah,
nutshell?
absolutely. Well, like many young teenagers, I became a raving music fan at an early age. I was
Mhm.
obsessed with Kiss and learning every single Kiss riff imaginable on
Oh,
my
you're a guitar
guitar.
player.
Yeah,
Okay. All right.
on guitar in my bedroom.
Mhm.
My parents were thrilled that I was pursuing the arts, but scared to death that I was going to go down a terrible path of being a musician, which unfortunately
Yeah.
for them came true.
Came true. Came true.
Started my,
Yeah.
yeah, like I said, started my career in the music industry. I left a small town in Ohio. At 18 years old, packed up a bunch of gear in a van with three other guys and moved to Hollywood. Had
Oh,
no
wow.
idea or clue what we were doing, where we were going.
Mhm.
Funny little side story: when we thought we're landing in Hollywood, we actually landed in North Hollywood and didn't know the difference. So, any of your
Nice.
viewers that are familiar with Southern California know that Hollywood, North Hollywood are not the same, especially in
That's how much you
1980.
didn't know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but it seemed like it's got to be close.
Yeah.
But that was kind of the beginning of my music career. We were actually really fortunate. We stumbled our way into an opportunity within probably 6 months with an artist that had an upcoming release on MCA Records that just happened to need a band, and we kind of fit the bill. Um, it's amazing how being in the right place at the right time in so
Mhm.
many aspects of our careers kind of take place. But yeah, ended up with that opportunity, and it was an incredible opportunity to see the United States and see the world, and play on some amazing stages with some amazing other artists that really kind of facilitated my ability to start writing more.
Mhm.
And through that experience, ended up with a publishing deal with Warner Chappell Music, and that ran about 10 years. So I was playing with different recording artists and writing for artists for a significant portion of the early part of my career. From that, it kind of transitioned into production management.
Mhm.
Um, like many 80s and early 90s rockers, grunge killed what I was doing. So I had to find another pathway.
Mhm.
um, and ended up in production management. And slowly that kind of revealed opportunities in corporate events, primarily in the beauty business. I produced a number
Mhm.
of beauty events early on for Aveda and was involved with them for many years.
Mhm.
Then transitioning into owning my own experiential agency that I founded in Nashville. And then I had an incredible opportunity late last year to join the team at Van Wagner. And at this point in my career, it was an opportunity to be a part of a team and to be a part of events at such scale that I was really excited about joining the team there. And we're doing some incredible work in growing the brand and our reach.
I love that. I didn't know the early part of your career story. So you have been a person that took the risk. So that's the first step. You just like went out like a lot of young people do, have no idea what you're stepping into, but you did, and it kind of worked out. And then you were touring. It's what it sounds like. You were touring
Yeah.
nationally, doing the thing on real stages, real equipment, real everything, and then turning into a writer. And so you have practical experience with licensing, publishing, all of those things from a writer's perspective. And then getting into more the production management side of it, which is amazing. That's an amazing both sides of it, beginning of your career. But can you tell me a little bit more about what your day to day at Van Wagner is like now?
Sure. I kind of sit at the intersection of experience design, partner engagement, and business development. It's a really unique role. Van Wagner primarily is known as one of the largest sports presentation and broadcast entities in the world.
Mm-hmm.
43 consecutive Super Bowls as executive producer, F1s, the Olympic Games, NHL, NBA. I mean, the NCAA, it goes on and on and on, where we're
Mm-hmm.
part of some of the largest fan gatherings in the world. With that expertise has also then kind of opened up opportunities to get involved in sponsors that were doing activations at these events. And
Mm-hmm.
through that, just through kind of the opportunity being there, those brands are like, hey, can you help us with our corporate events and expos and trade
Mm-hmm.
shows and all of that work? So I was really brought in to help grow the live events part of the business,
Yeah.
primarily a newer division called Van Wagner X, which is our experiential agency within Van Wagner. It's part of our productions and broadcast team, but really focusing on that intersection of sponsorship activations and live event production and broadcast.
Love it. Love it. So that kind of ties it all together there. With all that background experience, you also understand large format events. And so one more question before we get into the real meat of what I want to ask you about. We're gonna be talking a little bit about music licensing. And I feel like this keeps coming up. For a while there, it was like every room I went in, people were talking as if they were experts about music licensing, but they were saying conflicting things. But can you share a little bit about your background in music licensing? And some of it was implied in what you were talking about, but what's your background there?
Yeah, sure. I realized the value of that when I was actively in the music industry and was in writers' rooms and recording with artists when we started to have to do publishing splits. And it's
Hmm.
if you didn't raise your hand and clearly state that bridge or that chorus or that lyric, I contributed, and that equated to what percentage of the song would
Hmm.
really impact how I would be compensated as a writer when that song was recorded and released and broadcast or used in a live event. So it started very early on that I realized that I had to have an affiliation with a PRO, BMI, CSAC, or CSAC.
And PRO, what
ASCAP,
is that acronym?
Performing Rights Organization.
Got
So
it.
all
Okay.
songwriters and publishers, if they're not, you should be.
Hmm.
Have an affiliation with one of those three organizations in the United States.
Got it.
So I was affiliated with BMI at the time.
Hmm.
And as we were recording and releasing music, those and our publisher would ensure that they were reported back to that PRO so we were compensated appropriately for its use. Um, I think that through that, I was able to facilitate the ability to make a career as a songwriter for a number of years. But when that kind of transitioned, and during my transition as being an event producer and a tour manager and that sort of work, I did do some consulting with CSAC in Nashville as a music licensing consultant for them too. So I understand from the songwriter perspective, the PRO perspective, and then as an event organizer that has a
Hmm.
responsibility to ensure that those publishers and songwriters are compensated appropriately.
Okay, so just a side note before we go on. It's always interesting and kind of bizarre when you look at the monetization of art and how it plays out. It's such what a weird experience to be a songwriter. And if you don't stand up for yourself in a in a room and say, I had a say in this part, then you don't get a piece of that. It's just an odd concept, isn't it? It's
It,
like this
it,
intellectual property or this creative thing that gets
it,
monetized.
yeah, it really is. I think there's yeah, historically, there's been this cultural understanding that is a misunderstanding that music is free. You turn
Hmm.
on, back in the day, you turned on the radio, or you went to a
Right.
club, or you went to a concert, or you turned on the television. They didn't realize that there were licenses that were required. There was expenses that went into creating that music. But at the end of the
Hmm.
day, music is so incredibly valued for the emotional connection that it makes with each and every one of us. I'm sure everyone that's listening and watching today knows there's that one song that comes on that takes them back to when they were 16 years old. There's that one song that reminds them of the first dance they had with a boy or a girl.
Hmm.
It has this incredible value that quite honestly is greater than the monetization portion of it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when something has that much value, the creator deserves and has the right to be compensated for that work. It
Right.
is no
100%.
different than the person who's building your house or providing Wi-Fi for your event, whether the price is
Yeah.
correct or not. But there's a number of different kind of scenarios where you can look and see. It is truly valuable. And for our audience in particular, if we removed music from our events and experiences, they're never going to have the impact that we're designing for.
That's
It
such a
is.
fresh way of looking at that the impact of notes and the air. I mean, what is it? It's like it's hard to define, but it is definitely a universal language. There's something about music that speaks to people that transcends politics and borders and really
Absolutely.
anything. And what it does in our events is just a small part of it. It's really an everyday thing with all pretty much every culture on earth, relates
Yeah.
to music. And so when you frame it that way, I've never thought of it that way when I'm thinking it from a commercial side, like what are we doing at this show and why do we have to pay? And well, think about it from the creator's perspective and what value that they added to your experience here. That's a great approach, probably the right attitude to approach this
Mm.
this conversation about licensing.
Well, I think you're onto something there too. And when you think about that from a, you know, production standpoint, sound design is equally as important as lighting design when you think about it.
Hmm.
And with our audience as well, generally we're concerned about, can you hear the keynote speaker? Was the audio feed to the hybrid broadcast clean? But at the same time, it's these other elements when you think about the overall experience design that the audio and the music and the voice and vocal needs to be designed in a way to emotionally connect with that audience or that member or that fan.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. So on that note, uh, my next question was going to be, why does music licensing matter as it pertains to corporate events? You just answered that. I think there's a lot behind it that we need to approach it from. Is that
Mhm.
number one, it has a huge impact on your event and the emotions of your attendees. And number two, there was a creator behind that. We need to take care of
Sure.
them so that they can keep creating. And I'm a firm believer that AI is not going to replace true songwriting. It's only parroting what we're inputting into the machine, as it were.
Amen.
Um, I'm hoping that. And then some of that's just set on faith, but I just believe it. And as someone that grew up doing music too, I have to believe that because I know the depth of emotion that can come from creating music. But what do you think are some common misunderstanding around music licensing? And we'll keep our conversation to say corporate events because
Sure.
licensing can play across TV, recording,
Sure.
you said radio, streaming. There's so many different variations, but let's just say for an in-person corporate event and maybe the streaming component to that.
Sure.
That's kind of the further conversation.
So, I think generally most event planners think of music licensing as compliance but it's truly about value. You need to think about it as you're approaching your experience design. How is music and your audio track? It's funny. People talk about, I'm going to step back a second. When people talk about a song, and you'll hear people say, well, that song is the soundtrack of my life.
Yeah.
Well, what's the soundtrack of your event? What is
Right.
it? It could be one song, it could be a playlist, but to truly curate a soundtrack for that experience, you need to invest in it. Just like you invest in AV, you invest in content, you invest in food and beverage, you invest in that $150 a gallon coffee.
Right.
Your music license for your 400 person event is probably going to be, for a single day, is probably less than your coffee.
Right.
Think about that.
Which I don't know if that's a statement about the cost of licensing or coffee, or maybe both.
The things that we hear from our customers
Yes,
that
that's for
keep
sure.
them up at night.
It's that coffee,
Um,
man.
but I do believe that it is an investment. It's a value. It is not a compliance check the box. And in many times in our industry, we have to check a lot of boxes. Um, but this is a box that needs to be highlighted and communicated to the end stakeholder that it's a value.
Yeah.
And if the budget goes up 150 or $750, you have to be able to validate why you believe it's important beyond the compliance aspect, which unfortunately many people, those stakeholders are more worried about the compliance than the emotion. But that's a whole nother podcast on experience design and stakeholder engagement.
Well, on that note, what do you think are some common misunderstandings about music licensing? Because I've heard a bunch of advice from people that is clearly wrong.
Yeah, I think the number one kind of misunderstanding is that, oh, the venue has a license. Well, yes,
Hmm.
granted, Hotel XYZ in Boise, Idaho does have a music license, but it does not cover your private event space, period.
Yeah.
If you are having if you have any control over the audio within a space of your private function outside of family and friends, there is an exemption there for that. You are required to have a music license. Even if you were using in-house audio and you told the venue, play these songs through their audio, you are still technically, by copyright law, required to have a license. So that's probably the number one misconception. I've also heard, oh, we have a cover band that's coming in.
Mhm.
And the band or the DJ, that they have a license. Well, that's absolutely not true. Even if they had a license, it wouldn't apply, and there's no reason for them to have a license. They're the performers. They're not the
Yeah. Those people aren't
organizers.
getting a license to come play your gig.
No, but a little side note, I do some advisory with some artists that I'm still friends with, and management companies in Nashville that I'm connected to, and I'm surprised how many times I have to remind them when an artist releases a new record to make sure that they submit that piece of art to their PRO, to BMI, ASCAP, or CSAC, so they know that that song exists. It's
Amazing.
like it's like it's creatives. Sometimes it's like, oh, my art, I
Oh,
want to put
yeah.
it out in the world. But you're like, okay, well, as you want to kind of grow your art. But that's another podcast
But you
for
want to buy
music.
groceries, so go
Yeah,
and
you
make sure
do.
people know about it.
Uh, but I think that is the number one misunderstanding, is that the venue's going to cover the license. Or I've also heard, well, the AV companies, they have a license. No,
Okay.
or the AV company is going to use a Spotify playlist.
Hmm.
Well, the AV company can play a Spotify playlist, but they're not the organizer of that event. And ultimately, the organizer of the event is the one responsible for the obtaining a music license.
Okay, so I'm hearing a couple things. It's everything that I've heard, everything that you just mentioned, I've heard tons of times, and people say it with a lot of confidence, and they're wrong. But what I'm hearing is if you have a controlled event that you kind of quote unquote own, this is your product that you're putting out into the world. So it could be 100 people, little managers meeting. It could be an event for 15,000 people. Everybody's in a room. You have music playing in some way, shape, or form at your event. You are required to obtain a license to cover those songs. Is that a
Abs-
true statement?
that is
And
a
no
very true
matter
statement.
if the convention center or the Hilton or the Shed that you're playing or wherever, they might have some sort of blanket license. They would get it for maybe their music, their ambient music for their own purposes.
Correct.
But for your event that you're producing, you have to have your own license. So that's what we're talking about today. And I think that kind of clears it up. If you're producing an event and you do not have a license, you need to get a license. So that's step one.
That's great. And one other misconception, and you just brought up a great point, is okay, I will go get an ASCAP license, or
Okay, get into this.
I will get a BMI license. Well, that's fine, but you have to do your due diligence to ensure that the material, the songs that you are playing at your event, are solely and only covered under that PRO. So, for example, most songs are very few are written traditionally by one particular songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
Groups of songwriters coming together is very, very common, especially in Nashville. Music Row, we still, the publishers still have songwriting rooms in their offices where artists, writers show up every day and they sit in a room and they work with one another and they churn out songs one after another, for example. But that publisher may have a writer that's with ASCAP, one with CSAC, and one with BMI. They write that song. You need to do the due diligence and make sure that that song that you're using, by visiting their websites and making sure that there weren't other songwriters. Because if you only have the BMI license, but that song you're playing had a co-writer that was ASCAP, now you have to have an ASCAP license and a BMI license. Now, not to say that it's not impossible, because I've done it myself where a client is like, hey, I have a BMI license. And I'm like, okay, well, then you and I need to go through the BMI catalog, which is
Mm-hmm.
difficult, or you need to tell me every song that you're interested in. And we've got to search and make sure that it's solely only BMI artists. So that's another
Okay.
misconception. That is, I only need one. It is true. It could be true, but many times you do. If you have a large event, multi-day event, and you're going to play a lot of music, you do need to have more than one license.
Okay. So, for example, if I want my walk-in music to be top 25 pop songs today playlist or something, you're saying just go ahead and get the license for the three main PROs and you're going to be okay. You're going to
You are
be
going to be
okay.
okay.
And that's,
Absolutely.
and it's not incredibly cost prohibitive. We're not talking about just like
No,
tons and tons of
your
dollars, right?
100-person meeting is going to be less than probably $300. It's very,
Yeah.
it's very cost effective. Um,
And then you
two
don't have to
things,
worry about it.
you don't have to worry about it. Um, it, the reality, of, are they going to find out that your 100-person event is doing it? They could. With the technology and AI now, the PROs are able to identify just about any venue or event. This is something that is going to make license enforcement a little more aggressive in the
Mm-hmm.
coming years, because they can just search. They know every venue, every event that's happening. They can find out who the organizer is or who our client is if they find something on a producer's website, and
Mm-hmm.
they're going to reach out. As a meeting management and meeting planning professional, I believe it's our duty to inform our clients and our end users of all the requirements,
Yeah.
and that being one of them. I think it also positions us as experts, and that's why they hire us. When we're expected as event producers and organizers, to continually do more with less, we also have to make sure that we're we're communicating value, and this is an area where we can establish ourselves as experts because we're protecting them. And I think ultimately our goal is to protect their investment and to protect their integrity by doing the right thing.
Okay, and I agree with you, especially in the context of how you set it up at the beginning too. It's not just compliance. You're also taking care of the artists that are creating this
Hmm.
wonderful backdrop for your events. So, if you're talking to your client, then walk me through how you would say, okay, this is how you're going to obtain a license. So, what would be the steps?
Sure, the steps are actually really easy. Once, we've, had time with our client, we've identified venue, dates, projected attendance. It's pretty easy. You basically go on to each of the three PRO's websites, upload the forms that give them the information, the dates, the attendance, and the venue. And then you're generally covered. Now, all three of them have a little different kind of calculations on how those work. But they're still kind of flush out about the same price. Um, it's very seamless and very easy. I think from communicating to our clients, it's just important to tell them like this is just a cost, and while you may not have had anyone kind of inform you that this is our responsibility
Hmm.
to take care of this, it is something that we need to be aware of. And I think being able to communicate that the PROs now do have technology. Things are they're going to find out, and they are researching. So it's
Yeah,
not a matter is of if you're going to get contacted without a license. It's probably when, especially if you have an event of any significant size. But it's very
got it.
easy to do. And the other thing is I want to add this. Um, I don't want our viewers and listeners to think that there's this scary police music licensing people out there, boogeyman that's coming to get you. If you're a habitual abuser, or I've seen some pretty significant lawsuits
Hmm.
to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars per song, but those were some really bad actors. Um, if they do contact you and say, hey, we know you've done this annual conference now for 5 years and it's 3 days and 500 people a day, technically you would owe us X amount of dollars in back license fees.
Hmm.
All you have to do is contact them and say, hey, I really wasn't aware of the process or understood, and I would like to obtain a license for this year moving forward. 99.9 times they're going to say, okay. Now, if you've got a citywide that's hundreds of thousands of people that's been going on for 10 years,
Right.
not necessarily the case, but they will still, which I've seen happen. They will negotiate with you too. With that particular example, I mean, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars,
Hmm.
but the organizer was able to go back and say, "Hey, can we settle this?" And it was settled. But for most of us doing corporate events in our world, they want you to be compliant. They want to be a partner. They want to be able to empower the creators to continue to make the art that we're using, that our audiences find so much emotional value in. So they're not there to be the boogeyman. They're there to help all of us. And they have the responsibility to make sure that the songwriter does get compensated. And quite honestly, with not to get into to royalties, but with streaming and the changes, an artist that used to make $3 to $5 on a CD is now making 0.003 cents or whatever it is on Spotify per stream. They have to have like a billion views or streams to have the same revenue that they would have if they would have had a hit song, in 1990. So the
So there's like
performing.
10 artists making any real money out of streaming right now. They have to find it in other ways.
Absolutely. And while this isn't a significant portion of that revenue, it is actually better than the streaming for a lot of artists. That's why you have artists that are these legacy artists that are just continuing to tour. They're in that
Yeah.
live event space, and they want the publishers to get their songs, sync licensing. There's a whole other world that goes with that. But even the live events, the performing rights organizations know that it's a value to the client and a value to the songwriter.
So this isn't just some big corporate machine sucking money out of your event budget. We're spreading it to the creators themselves.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And generally, unlike other things in our business, the annual license fees don't they don't accelerate like other things in our industry have. It's a very cost effective investment. And I tell clients all the time. I said, look what you're paying for Wi-Fi. Look what you're paying for coffee. Look what you're paying. These
Yes,
other
for sure.
things that feel that are very challenging as we develop our overall event budgets and our P&Ls for our experiences. This is such a small incremental part that probably has the biggest return of a few $100 that you're going to get on anything you put into an event. Because like I said earlier, take that music out and see what happens to your event. Now,
It's going to
the
be pretty
other
boring.
option is you can use royalty-free music. That is
Mm-hmm.
an option. And I have clients that's totally and perfectly fine. And some of it's not terrible. But at the same time, when you're talking with a key stakeholder at a corporate event, or you've got a CEO or a CMO, they want to come out to their favorite song. I've got a client right now he's a CEO of a Fortune 100 company. This guy loves AC/DC. He is not walking on stage to anything but Back in Black. He's just
Right.
not going to do it. And so he's like, I don't care what the license costs. I walk out to Back in Black, so make sure I have it. So just some interesting stories.
And not some elevator music version of Back in Black, the
No,
actual.
no,
Yeah.
the actual one. Yeah.
So that's good to know. So there's a few options for people that are producing events for music licensing. You can go ahead and get licensing from all three PROs, ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC.
CSAC,
Uh,
correct.
and then you can just open up Spotify and you can play a playlist. That
You
just
can do that.
simplifies it there. If you don't want to pay for that, you can look into royalty-free music, which essentially is a treasure trove of music that is nondescript. It has themes and vibes that you can kind of go for, but none of it's going to be popular music.
Right.
Probably some great players behind it, but it's not going to be
Yeah.
popular,
Yeah.
popular music. So that's two options for you. Or your third, you could just go without music entirely, and then
Yeah.
you're covered. Those are the
Yeah.
three ways you can be covered with music at your
Right.
next event. Wonderful. Well, that cleared it up for me. I feel like I have looked into it quite a bit in this last year, and this conversation kind of simplifies it. I think it can be a little mystifying or confusing for people, and this demystified it for me of just a simple, straightforward plan, and then mentally being able to frame the paradigm of like this actually is helping people too. This
Yeah.
isn't just another compliance thing. That was an interesting take on it for sure. Well, I really appreciate you talking to me about that. I do have one more question for you, and this is one you can answer or not. But what's the favorite event that you've been involved with in your entire career? Like your very
Gosh.
favorite memory.
I'm going to share something that I actually shared with BMI or with BMI. We're talking music licensing, so my acronyms are stuck in the music world with MPI Global for an interview I did with them recently. They asked me the same question, and I've been really blessed to be involved in some amazing experiences. From large citywide events and even some like recently, being a part of the Van Wagner team and seeing all the amazing Super Bowl activations. But a few years ago, I had the opportunity to do a partnership with the Breast Cancer Research Foundation.
Hmm.
They had partnered with BizBash for a number of years to do activations. They BizBash and BCRF came to us and said, "Hey, we want to create an experience that speaks directly to meeting planners." something that will help us communicate to planners in particular the value proposition that BCRF is offering. And they made it really clear this wasn't about trying to get donations. This was
Mm-hmm.
just a campaign to communicate the advancements that have taken place in that space. And it was really personal to me as well. My older sister, unfortunately, passed away of breast cancer when she was 38.
I'm
I
sorry.
was 10 years younger than her. And to go back to me packing up in the van and moving to LA when I was 17, not almost 18 years old, she was probably my biggest supporter. So
Mm.
she was extremely important to me. So when this opportunity arose, I wanted to really make sure that it had an impact. And ultimately, I remember talking to the team and said, I hope this, all 5,000 attendees it connect experience this and they understand the value. But I said, ultimately, I hope it just impacts one person.
Mm.
Like that was it. So we created this kind of immersive experience that was somewhat telling compelling stories of researchers and survivors and patients that were tied directly back to the advances that in research that BCRF has been able to fund. The campaign was called I Couldn't Have Planned for This. It was really around meeting planners plan for everything, but you can never plan for a breast cancer diagnosis. So
Mm.
we created this experience. It was immersive. There was a social campaign that was tied to it. And the event was, the first day the event went, we had tremendous turnout to the booth. I was waiting in the hotel lobby to go to dinner with the team at the close of the event that night. And I was actually sitting at the bar. And there was a lady sitting next to me, and she tapped me on the shoulder and she said, "Were you the guy at the breast cancer booth?" And I said, "Yeah." And she started crying.
Mm.
And I was like, are you okay? Can I get you anything?" And she went on to tell me that her mother had died of breast cancer when she was a teenager. And she was probably in her mid 40s or so. And she said, "I've been so petrified that I'm going to get breast cancer that I never had a mammogram.
Oh,
My
wow.
doctor tells me to go, but I just haven't been able to do it." She goes, "The story that I heard in that experience on the trade show floor moved me. I went up to my room, I called my doctor, and I scheduled a mammogram."
Oh, that's
And it's
amazing.
still emotional to me now.
Mm.
I mean, then we're both crying in this hotel. We're in Minneapolis in this bar at a hotel, two grown people crying, and then my team comes up. They're like, "Are you okay?" And so we're telling the story. But ultimately, if I never do anything else in the event business, that covered it all.
I love that. I love
Yeah,
that. I think that uh, it is so satisfying to do an event that you saw connected with somebody. Like,
yeah,
and you're
yeah,
right. It just takes one. It doesn't
yeah,
have to be a
yeah,
bajillion people, just
yeah,
one, and it's so
yeah,
meaningful.
yeah. So
That's
that
such
was
a
my
great
favorite.
story. That
Yeah.
was great. And if people want to learn more about you and Van Wagner, what should they do?
Yeah, great. vanwagner.com. I'm active on LinkedIn. Reach out there, send me a connection request or a message. I'm also very involved in MPI, so you'll see me at most MPI Carolinas event, my new home chapter, by the way. But I'm also still very active in the Tennessee chapter where I was a previous president and still have a lot of connections there. But yeah, between vanwagner.com, LinkedIn, and MPI, you'll find me.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing some of your knowledge. It was very insightful and helpful, and hopefully it helps some of our listeners understand music licensing a little bit better. So thank you, Michael.
Well, sure. And one thing, if you do have it, if anyone has any questions about licensing, just reach out to me on LinkedIn, or you can email me, mfarrell@vanwagner.com. I am more than happy to help direct you, give you information. And it's just, my way of giving back to the industry. So again, and if there's any questions or concerns about, the status of your event and your license requirements, I'm happy to help. It's my way to give back. So
I love it. Well, thank you. And we will drop Michael's information in the episode notes so you can check that out if you'd like to. And thank you for joining us on this episode of the Event Pro Show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our entire backlog of episodes at theeventproshow.com, where 1 week I will be introducing you to someone that's an expert like Michael, and the next week I will be diving a little bit deeper into AV. But either way, thank you so much for taking some of your time and hanging out with us, and we will see you on the next one. Thanks. The Event Pro Show is a production of LEMG, video by Nick Barrett, audio and post-production by Prince Thompson. You can learn more about us at lemg.live.